Have you committed a burglary?
No.
Or a robbery?
No.
Auto theft?
No.
Shoplifting?
No.
I think the National Data Center, right now, in its early stages, poses a tremendous threat to liberty.
Individual Americans being robbed of their thought by such methods and having their privacy invaded.
Potentially schizophrenic, paranoid. And these records will stay with the child.
The American who has a file on him is an American who is self-conscious and worried about how he leads his life.
The right to talk, the right not to talk, the right to choose, the individual to choose the people to whom he will talk, when he will talk, the things he will talk about, the views that he has that he wants to share with other people, the questions he will ask. This is the heart of what I consider to be the right of privacy.
This baby is just 1 second old. Here in the delivery room of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, he has just won his first fight, the fight to life. Many other battles await him in the years to come. Most are common to all mankind and have been through the ages. But this newborn boy and all the others of his generation face a new and serious battle which they may not win. The right to be let alone. The right to privacy. His parents allowed our cameras to film his birth. His footprints are taken for identification. He is still less than a minute old, and this is his first record. He is also given a tag with a number which corresponds to one given his mother. His file has begun. When this baby is a young man celebrating his 17th birthday, the year will be 1984. Will his 1984 be the world that George Orwell foresaw? A world stripped of privacy? A world watched by Big Brother? Or will this child have what Justice Brandeis at the turn of the century labeled our inalienable right? The right to enjoy life. The right to privacy. His birth certificate already contains private information, race and color. The hospital must provide this information to the Department of Health. It is considered confidential material. As he grows, so will his files. He will be subjected to an increasing succession of questions, and his answers will be reduced to punch cards, rows of type, and magnetic tape. More and more files. How many are necessary? How many will invade his privacy and be used against him and do him harm? Many people have passed through this hospital for one reason or another, from the removal of a cyst to a serious mental breakdown. Each has left his own record. There are 500,000 individual files stored here, and like most medical files in hospitals throughout the country, they are an open book to insurance companies checking on their applicants. But the flow of facts doesn't stop there, for the insurance companies work hand in hand with the credit companies who investigate for them. And the government has its own information gathering network. The hospital is just one source of personal information. But it is in the school that the invasion of privacy directly confronts an individual. Martin Gross, who wrote The Brain Watchers, describes it.
Well, in a school, there's a new breed of man. There's a guidance counselor, who's often a woman. And when I went to school, the guidance counselor was someone who helped you pick a vocation, whether you were suited to be an engineer or a carpenter or a secretary or go on to college. But today, the guidance counselor is a pseudo-psychologist. Person takes courses in psychometrics and in testing, and has this little child and views the child not just as someone who she can advise and help, which was the purpose of the situation, but views the child as a psychological subject, someone you can give a test like the Minnesota Counseling Inventory, or the California Test of Personality, or the Mooney Problem Checklist. And this kind of test probes into the mind of the child and delves into the home environment. They ask questions such as, do you like your mother and father? Do your parents get along? Is your home quarrelsome? Is their home too dirty so that you don't want to bring your friends home? Does mommy and daddy like your sister or brother more than you? Are you nervous about menstruation? Are you nervous about boys? Do you think you're going to have a good sex life? And it probes, and it does this at every level. The questions are set so that the 7-year-old can answer a problem checklist, so that a adjustment inventory can be given to a 12-year-old where they start talking about boys and sex and dating. And when it gets to the college level, at some colleges they have a Mooney Problem Checklist where they ask the college freshman, are you thinking about suicide? Now, this kind of question, when given to a student in the 4th or 5th grade, begins the early conditioning of the child into what we can call confessionals. That is, he's used to the concept of probing himself for public use, so that later on in life, if he's given a personality test in industry, or people ask him an excessive number of questions when he applies for a job, or a file is being built on him on his entire life structure, he's been conditioned to accept this as normal rather than as being totalitarian, which it is. The parents generally do not know that the tests are being given. And I quote a school administrator who says, it is not the general policy of our school to inform the parents as to the testing program within the school. They think that's the province of the school. Well, we parents think that the province of the school is to educate our children, not to use them as guinea pigs in untested psychological experiments.
Probing personality with tests is more and more popular with industry and government. Individuals have to fill in the blanks, often to highly personal questions about sex and religion, on an assortment of tests. These tests are so widely used that the Psychological Corporation of America, which publishes many of them, grossed $3 million last year selling booklets and answer sheets to a multitude of psychologists at schools, in industry, and in government. The Peace Corps of the government is a big user, giving the popular Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory to applicants. Dr. Al Karp, Director of Selection for the Peace Corps, says the government uses tests to ensure that the individual is able to cope with the conditions he will face overseas. Last month, the Senate passed a bill to protect the privacy of government employees, marking Congress's first attempt to deal with the problem legislatively. The bill was sponsored by Senator Ervin of North Carolina.
Oh, I got interested in this subject several years ago as a chairman of the subcommittee on constitutional rights, because of the numerous complaints we received from federal employees about the tyrannies being in practice upon them by the executive branch of the government. They were asked on various tests, psychological tests, very insulting questions. And they had a medical questionnaire they were required to answer, but we raised so much cane about that, I understand it's now been withdrawn, but I want to show you some of the questions. Now, the man was not only asked about himself, whether he was a sleepwalker, or if a lady whether she had a vaginal discharge, or whether she'd been treated for female disorder. An applicant was asked whether they'd ever worn contact lenses. And they were asked to answer questions about their father, their mother, their wife, their brothers and their sisters. Whether they ever had any of their father, their mother, or the brothers or the sisters or the wife had ever had syphilis, or had hay fever, or whether any of their relatives had committed suicide or been insane, and whether they had any homosexual, these are questions asked of them, whether they had any homosexual tendencies. And said this, they were trying to ascertain their health, not the health of the employee, but it seems to me they were asking about the health of all of their connections, both the mental health and the physical health, and also some of their bad habits. Then they had, I had this statement made to me by a person who applied for employment at the National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland. He said when he graduated from college, he was asked these questions, among other things. When was the first time you had sexual relations with a woman? How many times have you had sexual intercourse? Have you ever engaged in homosexual activities? Have you ever engaged in sexual activities with an animal? When was the first time you had intercourse with your wife? Did you have intercourse with her before you were married? How many times? This man said he felt so insulted by this, although he was a college graduate, anxious to get employment, that he refused to take employment from the government when he had to submit to such indignities as this. Then we have these so-called psychological tests, which it seems to me are worthless, because any person who has intelligence above the grade of a moron would know what kind of answers he should give to the questions in order to get a job with the government, and how not to answer them if he doesn't want a job with the government. But some of them are very insulting, in my opinion. They ask him about his attitude towards members of his family, about his mother, his attitude towards his mother, his attitude towards his father, his attitude towards his wife. And they ask him such questions as to this, which he has to answer whether it's true or false. My sex life is satisfactory. Evil spirits possess me at times. At times I feel like swearing. And let me make an honest confession here. I don't know whether I can pass this test, because when I found out all of the tyrannies which the executive branch of the federal government is inflicting upon federal employees, I felt like swearing then, and I still feel like swearing.
We asked a psychologist and management consultant, Dr. James Farr, why business felt the need to make psychological evaluations.
As a psychologist, for the last 10 or 12 years, I've had a good deal of experience doing psychological personality evaluations for such companies as CBS, Hercules Powder Company, North Carolina National Bank, Pfizer Chemical, and Shearing Corporation, and many others. I have evaluated both applicants and people already on the job. Now, there has been a great deal of discussion in the papers and elsewhere about increasing invasions of privacy in our society, and I agree that there seems to be an increasing danger of this. I do not agree, however, that personality testing per se constitutes an improper invasion of privacy. Now, what is so private, for instance, about a personality before a man takes a job, in view of the fact that as soon as he's hired, everybody on the job gets to know his personality intimately? And furthermore, his personality then determines to a large extent, or to an important extent, whether or not he succeeds and how well he succeeds.
But there are hundreds of records that every one of us has filled out, all requiring private information about ourselves, all put in a file somewhere. It's like telling little bits of the story of ourselves to a new person for each new record. But even questionnaires and psychological tests may not be enough for many companies who now make prospective employees submit to a so-called lie detector test before hiring. It's such big business that there are 50 such companies offering lie detector tests listed in the classified directory in New York, 30 in Chicago. Here at 600 South Michigan Boulevard in Chicago is the oldest and one of the largest, John E. Reed and Associates. In these small rooms, this one company gives between 5,000 and 6,000 tests a year, 2,000 of them part of a pre-employment screening.
Okay, just sit perfectly quiet, look right straight ahead. Do they call you Bill?
Yes, sir.
Are you over 25 years old?
Yes, sir.
This is Bill Mackey, who has applied for a job as a vending machine operator. The examiner is George Lindbergh. This is an actual test.
Did you ever steal any merchandise from a place where you worked?
No, sir.
Are you in Chicago right now?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever steal any money from a place where you worked?
No, sir.
Have you ever been arrested?
No, sir.
Did you ever commit any other crime that I read to you?
No, sir, I haven't.
Did you lie to any of the questions that you answered here today?
No, sir.
Okay, now Bill, that's the end of the first test, so you can just kind of relax a little bit, move around. And did that arm bother you?
Pressure build-up.
Yeah, a little bit of pressure. So you can just kind of sit quiet for a minute, and I'm going to step out for a minute, and I'll be back in about 5 minutes. I want that arm to...
In ancient China, a suspect was required to answer questions with his mouth full of rice. If the rice stayed dry, he was clearly a liar, since the theory was that a liar's salivary glands would dry up out of fear. The modern lie detector is based on similar concepts, though more sophisticated, measuring physiological reactions to guilt with a pneumatic tube around the subject's chest to measure his breathing, and an inflatable rubber cuff wrapped around his arm to measure pulse and blood pressure. Bill Mackey passed the test and was recommended for his job as a vending machine operator. 25 to 30% do not pass. To qualify for a job, these people have been forced to undergo character evaluation and answer personal questions. And, more important, a record has been taken and put on file, a record which may be untrue and do them serious harm. Most polygraph tests are given in a room containing a hidden microphone and a two-way see-through mirror, enabling persons outside the test room to observe and listen to an examination without the examinee's knowledge. Bill Mackey gave us permission to film his test through this two-way mirror, normally used for observation. J. Kirk Barefoot, president of the Polygraph Association, doesn't think tests are an invasion of privacy.
The American Polygraph Association takes the position that a polygraph test is not an invasion of privacy, as the subject taking the test must voluntarily cooperate with the polygraphist. Our association also feels that a confidential polygraph test is the least offensive of any of the current forms of background investigation.
Well, it is voluntary in a technical sense. You don't have to work. You can starve if you want.
Congressman Moss of California.
That's the right of every free American. But if you want a job and you're rather desperate for it, and one of the conditions of pre-employment is that you take this test, then I question how voluntary it is. And here's where I think a citizen is entitled to the protection of the law. The person who wants to make a living is subjected to a polygraph examination where he is giving to persons who could, if they wanted to, engage in a little blackmail racket, highly confidential information. They pry at great length into the most intimate details of your life. And then from time to time, if there's a shortage in a cash drawer or there's a bit of inventory disappears, they're subjected again to this same invasion of their privacy.
The polygraph,
George Lindbergh, the examiner.
on the same token, protects the privacy of the individual that's being tested. If he has engaged in criminal activity or employment theft, it goes no further than this office, and we simply make a judgment that he is not suitable for a position of trust, and that's the end of it, you see. So it's a twofold thing. We protect the privacy of the individual, and we arrive at an accurate determination for the employer.
From the mail I receive, I would say that there is an alarming growth in the use of these devices. And all you need really to set yourself up as a polygraph operator in most jurisdictions is the money to buy a machine and the ability to read an instruction booklet. And then you can determine whether the person you're interrogating is telling the truth or telling a lie. Of course, the most expert in this field, those highly trained physicians in neurology and physiology and psychology and psychiatry, they can't tell. But give a man an instruction book or a week's instruction, and he can tell definitely whether you're telling the truth or telling a lie.
Here are the experiences of two people with the polygraph.
Just out of the Army and looking for a job, and I applied for a job with one of the security agencies here in the city. Everything seemed to be in order, and I was asked to take a lie detector test in lieu of waiting 3 to 6 months for security clearance. And I agreed and was taken to a small office with a little man in it. And he strapped me up and connected me to his machine and asked a series of questions, including, I think, 3 having to do with homosexual acts. During the past 5 years, have you participated in any homosexual act? I think that another question was, during the past 5 years, have you been tempted to participate in any homosexual act? And if I'm not mistaken, another question was dealt with just any unnatural sex act. They were close together, but I think they were interspiced by rather harmless questions. I denied these. He pointedly returned to them, I think, twice, and then told me in a tone of voice which indicated he was very disappointed in me that I was lying, hiding things, and possibly or probably was a homosexual. I was denied the possibility of getting the position because this functionary decided on the basis of the polygraph indicator that I was lying to him about the possibility of homosexuality.
I was asked to take a lie test concerning about $40,000 missing in carpets and television. I work in a carpet department, and I took this test in which they asked me a lot of questions concerning me taking items and working with someone in cahoots with someone to take televisions and carpets and things. And they asked me a lot of questions concerning other people's and told me that I was a member of Black Muslim. And all of this is not so. I'm not a member of Black Muslim, and I didn't take anything from the company. And I didn't know what I was fired for. I asked him at the company to write me. I asked him what was I fired for. He didn't tell me. They didn't anyone tell me what I was fired for. They just told me not to come to work the next day.
Privacy broke out on the front page last year when America's largest manufacturing enterprise, General Motors, investigated a 31-year-old bachelor and auto critic, Ralph Nader. When this private investigation became public news, the Senate wanted to know more about it. Here is Senator Ribicoff questioning the president of General Motors, Mr. James M. Roach. Next to him is his lawyer, Theodore Sorensen.
This investigation was initiated, conducted, and completed without my knowledge or consent, and without the knowledge or consent of any member of our governing committee. To say that I wish I had known about it earlier is an understatement, and I intend to make certain that we are informed of similar problems of this magnitude in the future.
But how widespread is it in a corporation such as yours to have people who are involved in controversies or who might make a derogatory remark about General Motors to have their entire life investigated?
An episode of this kind is certainly a very rare and unusual occurrence in General Motors.
Do you know that it is rare or unusual, or does this take place without you even realizing it?
No, sir. I would know about it if it did take place, and we have been making very careful checks to ascertain what other investigations have been made.
Just picture yourself. I know Winstead. It's a small town in the northwest section of my state. Detectives invade a small town. They go to the high school principal and start making personal inquiries about a young man of the town who went to high school. They ask questions of private citizens. They go to his boyhood friends and start asking personal questions. They go to a small town like Winstead and ask questions whether a man like Ralph Nader was anti-Semitic. They ask the question, what were his sex habits? They go into a question of his employment, who his friends were, why isn't a man like this at this age married? What grades did he get? Would you hire him? Now, it doesn't take very long for people to start repeating that, and before you know it, you have a man who has led a private and honorable life, having reflections cast upon his entire character and that of his family because of these questions that detectives, who basically aren't sensitive, ask about a man by the name of Ralph Nader, and this must be happening all over America with many other Ralph Naders.
I am not here to excuse, condone, or justify in any way.
It was a great day for privacy when the president of General Motors had to apologize publicly.
I want to apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader. I sincerely hope that these apologies will be accepted. Certainly, I bear Mr. Nader no ill will.
We talked to Ralph Nader in Washington and asked him if he felt vindicated when Mr. Roach apologized to him last year.
Well, I think it was a desirable action on his part in order to save his company from an even more tarnished reputation than it came out with. But I don't think an act of alleged contrition is really an act of reform. The two are not synonymous. I think that any corporate head that alleges lack of awareness about what goes on in his company, when it goes on case after case and persistently over a period of years, is either not running that company properly or is being deceived by his immediate subordinates at the vice presidential level. I think that there is a routine reaction by corporate heads in this country when their company is called on the carpet for some antisocial act. The heads of the company say, we didn't know anything about it. And the people at the lower echelons either say, we didn't have responsibility or we were just taking orders. So you get a passing of the buck of the responsibility up and down and down and up, and the corporation usually emerges without the kind of disciplined accountability that it would have to be more socially responsible in the future. The business of finding out details about individuals for corporations is an extremely widespread one, very lucrative one, multi-million-dollar one. The detective who was retained by General Motors had done in the past 5 years some 25 other investigations alone for General Motors, ranging from the investigation of Danny Kaye to investigation of a Harlem civil rights group. Now, if you extrapolate that all over the country just for General Motors, I think you can reasonably assume that this company alone, since 1960, has investigated literally hundreds and hundreds of people.
Credit just as the retail credit company with its main office in it grossed over $125 million. If you have ever applied for insurance, opened a charge account, bought something on the installment plan, retail credit company or a similar company did a check on you. Here is a vice president of the company, Mr. Charles Watts.
Our main business is insurance reporting, life, fire, burglary, bond, inland marine, any kind of insurance, and that perhaps comprises, maybe 60 to 65% of our reporting. Then we're in the business of making reports on prospective employees, and this is a large market. We probably have 20% of our business in that particular area. We have about 40 or 45 million files. They're located 100,000 here, 300,000 there, depending upon the population breakdown. So we have 313 branches. So the whole area of information gathering is what retail credit company specializes in. We have 12,000 people in our company, of whom probably, in the vicinity of about 8,000 are salaried investigators for the parent company on the streets every day, gathering information for one purpose or another.
We're going up there to talk to the employment manager.
This is Frank Phipps of King City, Alabama, a credit investigator. With him is a trainee, Charles Flynn of Tupelo, Mississippi, who is being shown the ropes. The first step is usually the address telephone directory, a handy tool for getting the names and telephone numbers of the neighbors of people under investigation. The questions asked and answered about prospective policyholders are often highly personal.
A general area is who is the man, where has he lived, how long has he been there, is he married, his children, what he does for a living, his outside interest, his health. Your health, you're getting down to the question of where some people might balk on giving information. And you understand that they have no obligation to us, and if they decline any information, then of course we don't hold it against them. If they won't tell us, then we'll go and we'll ask the neighbors.
The investigators may talk to anyone, a boss, former employer, local banker, but they rely heavily on what neighbors have to say. So your personal file with the credit company often is based on what your neighbors think and tell the investigator about you.
Good morning. I'm Frank Phipps, an insurance inspector, looking for some information on a fellow named Vic Smith. They live right across the street here at 1100. No, heart condition, or is he diabetic or handicapped or anything like that? He didn't live here, though. All right, well, I think that takes care of it then. Thank you very much.
People are willing to talk about their neighbors and spread gossip. Frank told us that there are very few people who will not answer his questions.
A lady across the street said that he lived over here. This is a young fellow about 25 or so. You got a son or a relative, anybody like that living here with you that's moved out? We've definitely got the wrong number. There's no Vic Smith living here. All right, well, thank you very much, and we'll try that other one then. All right, shoot. Which way do we go from here?
We're going to take a left here.
Okay, you looked that inquiry over now, and you know what we need. This is just a regular life case. It wasn't a flat tire, was it? Be straightforward, no hazards on employment. We might find a questionable environment down here, I don't know. Where you live? Right over there, huh? That brick house? All right, we'll go there where your mom is.
They ask the questions with the detachment of a doctor doing a medical examination.
What kind of help?
Well, they're real nice people.
What kind of neighbor is he? You know, the people he runs around with and what he does?
Well, you know, when I see him pat them down the road, you know.
What about his drinking habits? How much does he drink?
I ain't never known him drink because I used to go there.
Does he drink?
All right, thank you, ma'am.
The question is standard on every investigation. That means Retail Credit Corporation and its affiliates have information largely gathered from neighbors on the drinking habits of 45 million Americans. If they find out you drink too much, there is another questionnaire which asks more information from your neighbors. What does he usually drink? Beer, wine, whiskey? How often does he drink? To what degree? Is he loud and boisterous?
His family health, your health and your husband's just fine. Anybody diabetic or heart condition?
I'm amazed at how glibly people will talk about their neighbors when they are approached by private detectives. Instead of saying to the detective, who are you? Who do you represent? What are your credentials? What are you after? It seems that people fall all over one another trying to tell this individual who comes into a town or a city the latest gossip. I think this is not the kind of responsibility that we owe to our fellow men.
This collection of facts, hearsay, and gossip is typed up and sent to the insurance company or merchant who has ordered it. Once your credit file has begun, your creditors are not shy about reporting whether you are fast pay, slow pay, or no pay. This record, good or bad, can follow you wherever you move. It is impossible to get rid of, since there is an association of credit bureaus covering every square inch of the United States. A giant network of private information and opinion on individuals. Information available only to those who buy it, with little safeguard to limit its ultimate use. Public official records are stored in government buildings in almost every city in America. The county clerk's office. There's a fund of public documentary evidence on any person who has ever lived in the area. You don't have to pose as a private detective or government agent to get information. It's all there for anyone who wants it. The clerks will get you transcripts, from files of Army discharges to marriage records. Nobody asks what your business is. The judgment books are in open files for anyone to pick up and get information on faulty payments and financial transactions. Records on the value of your house from the tax stamps when you bought it. There is information for any prying eye on minutes of court proceedings, records of arrests and convictions and scrapes with the law, marital breakups with divorce proceedings available in most states, with all the intimate, lurid details, including the accounts of times and places where adultery was committed. It's public information, but when compiled in a dossier, some of it can become personally damaging. And even more so are the confidential official files, which are supposed to be kept secret, but are too often leaked for someone's personal advantage. Yale law professor Charles Reich cites two recent examples of how official files, state and federal, are sometimes leaked to discredit a person.
We had a businessman who was the Republican candidate for governor of Connecticut, a man of considerable success in the business world and of very fine reputation. Just a few days before the election, there were full-page ads in the Connecticut papers stating that a government agency had found the Republican candidate to be in some fashion an unreliable or undesirable character. And this was an official finding from a file. Not only was the file supposed to be confidential, and it was not Connecticut but New York that it had come from, it turned out that the document in question had been found to be inaccurate and had been withdrawn. But that correction was never made in the ad or later. And so, because it was so close to the election, the voters of this state were under the impression that the candidate had been officially determined to be a bad man in some way. Although this was not true, he had no chance to rebut it. We've never found out how that leaked out of the New York state files, or why, when it did leak, the correction didn't leak with it. But it represents a very good example of a serious abuse of the files. And I would comment that one ought not to have a system of files if it proves impossible to prevent abuses of this kind. In reading the paper recently, I came across a second illustration of this. A man came forward claiming that he had new information concerning Mr. Hoffa and his complicated affairs with the jury tampering case. The man may or may not be telling the truth. But in the very article that reported that he had new information, the paper said that this man was recorded in government files to be an unreliable character in various ways. And this description was so detailed, so full of particular items, that it was clear that somebody in the government had given the reporter this man's confidential file in an effort to refute the story that he was telling to the newspapers. As I say, maybe this particular man is indeed a liar, but the point that the files were being used for an improper purpose is unmistakable. And my feeling is that in addition to these public disclosures, there must be many instances in which blackmail is either threatened or actually happens because someone has possession of confidential information that belongs sealed in a file.
The files, growing, bulging with information, are now being computerized. Within the federal government alone, it is a billion-dollar business. The Defense Department is planning to use a computer capable of making 1 billion computations a second. State and local police records are already being hooked up on a national scale. Information retrieval in electronic data systems is virtually becoming instantaneous. 20 federal departments and agencies collect and publish data, among them the Internal Revenue, Census, Labor, Health, Education, and Welfare departments. And they are beginning to computerize their files. Information has been supplied to these agencies by citizens, generally in the belief that it will be kept confidential and used only by that agency. Now it is proposed by the Budget Department that much of this information be pooled in one central source, the National Data Center. The economists and statisticians say it means better and more economical record keeping and greater efficiency. But does it also mean the end of privacy? Reels of plastic tape containing a profile of an individual stored in a single informational warehouse where the touch of a button would assemble all the governmental information about a person since his birth. Each reel of tape can record so much information that it would require a single office building to store information on every man, woman, and child in this country. Vance Packard sounded the warning when he wrote, "My own hunch is that Big Brother, if he ever comes to the United States, may turn out to be not a greedy power seeker, but rather a relentless bureaucrat obsessed with efficiency. And he, more than a simple power seeker, could lead us to that ultimate of horrors, a humanity in chains of plastic tape."
All we can expect is to hold off the data bank for a while, to get in our licks, because there are not only governmental data banks, there are private data banks which are acting in a most pernicious way in some instances for individual liberties. The collection of credit data in the Southwest and the Midwest now, for example, on computer is such an example. It's entirely likely that such collections of private data may ultimately be funneled in as an input to a governmental data bank in the future.
A meeting of the American Civil Liberties Union in Washington. These men, like other groups, including the Daughters of the American Revolution, are fearful that the National Data Center poses a threat to privacy and the American way of life.
The data center is not just here and now. You build it with the best intentions now, you build it with limitations now, and tomorrow those intentions may pass and the limitations may dissolve. In addition, we might be able to identify certain kinds of information that are wholly innocuous or appear to be wholly innocuous because we think of it in a given context. And somebody comes up with a theory which may be right and may be wrong, that if we take all of that data that previously was for some completely different purpose, the impact of technology on unemployment, and we slice it just a little bit this way, and the machine can do that for us, we will know who is loyal and who is disloyal.
Right. When I give my information to the Internal Revenue Service, I assume, if you call it free choice or something like this, that Internal Revenue Service is going to keep it. I object to their having it, and I know that they divulge it to various and sundry sources improperly, but nevertheless, I give it to them for that purpose alone. I do not intend that this is to be put into a data bank where its potential is what bothers me. So this, just the mere gathering of it, the mere collating it into one large bank or small bank, whatever you want to say, is the problem that Ken raised. Because it may very well be that today you've got a J. Edgar Hoover, tomorrow you've got somebody else, and I don't know who's going to mishandle or handle the information properly. regardless of all the safeguards of the head of the agency. And I don't trust heads of agencies any more than I trust interlopers or anybody else.
At the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study, its director, Carl Kazin, the man who headed the task force that recommended the data center to the president, assures us that it will only be used for statistics.
And here I think it's important to make the distinction between a dossier and a statistical file. When we are building up a statistical file, we want to identify the individual only for the purpose of assembling all the data on him. So a statistical file identifies Carl Kazin, wants to identify him so that the facts that he is male, married, has 2 daughters, lives in a community of such and such population, has an income of between so and so and so and so, has so many degrees and so on, can all be hung together on one peg. That peg's Carl Kazin. The purpose of hanging that information together on the peg is to put it together with similar information for a similar group of people. And then you can, with that similar information, let's say, come to a conclusion as follows: that people with 2 advanced degrees, by and large, have average earnings per year which are higher than those with people with no advanced degrees by such and such, or maybe lower by such and such. But some statistical conclusion. And the role of the individual is, so to speak, the peg to hang the data on. A dossier, in principle, you're interested in the individual as such. You're interested in me, Carl Kazin, not an assemblage of statistical characteristics. And this difference is the guideline to what a data center would try to do. There is no intention of putting dossier information, personnel file information in it. There's every reason why the Congress, in framing the legislation that would define what a data center is and what it should do, should simply put a flat prohibition in.
How can it be guaranteed that the files will be kept to statistics? Already, as the New York Times reported recently, a data profile on all citizens is in the works in New Haven, Connecticut. A virtual prototype of the National Data Center, it represents IBM's first attempt to program an entire city. Why New Haven? IBM selected it because it is manageable, a population of 151,000, and it is well run. At City Hall, Mayor Richard Lee is enthusiastically working with IBM. He thinks the prospect magnificent. He hopes New Haven will become a national model for computerizing other American cities. All information on the citizens of New Haven has been scattered throughout the various agencies with little check from one to another. Now, with the computer, it will all be together and easy to get at. Every agency of the city will pool its information into the computer. The police will have access to all records, from a divorce decree to mental health records, from a welfare application to an income tax statement. IBM officials said that the individual citizen's privacy would be protected by tight security. Only authorized officials would have access to the computer file. They didn't state whom these officials would be, nor would they probably be known to these people who are being computerized. Nor do they probably realize that in less than 2 years, their private records will be instantaneously available to a group of men who could prove to be the new elite. The men who hold the keys to the new computer. The men who will know everything about everybody in New Haven. Probably the man in government most concerned with the computer and the invasion of privacy is Congressman Cornelius E. Gallagher of New Jersey, who recently headed a hearing on what he considered a great danger.
The thing that worries me about the computer, or as we head into the age of the computerized man, is what effect this is going to have on our society, what effect it's going to have on our institutions, what effect it is going to have on man's traditional right to live a life of dignity, what effect it's going to have on his civil rights, what effect it's going to have on our institutions. Because if we really want to live in a totally fishbowl society, where there is no privacy, where there is no secrets, where there is no place where man can be alone to think new thoughts and trigger his imagination, or where he can be alone to live in a relaxed society with his family. In our embassies throughout the world, we have lead-lined rooms where we talk business. Now, is the average recreation room in the family going to have to be converted into a lead-lined room that no one can have access to, where the real heart of the family life, the real meaningful part of family life will have to take place in a windowless, airless, lead-lined room?
I think that what we like best in Americans is their willingness to be bold and their willingness to do what they please and say what they please. I think that's what's made us a great country. And I think that to have somebody watching you is a great inhibition of that fine part of the American character and an invitation to make us into time servers and conformists. And when we realize that terrible danger of the files, I think we ought to ask ourselves, is it worth it? We get lots of information, but it doesn't really tell us very much. We don't know so much when we've read all this stuff, and I doubt if any employer finds the files as valuable as he thinks they will be. Human character is still a little too complicated to put down on paper. And I think that all of this gathering of information, all of this effort to be certain in advance how people will turn out, is rather futile, rather silly, rather useless. And if it was also harmless, I suppose I wouldn't be here objecting to it. But I think it is worth so little and so deeply harmful that we ought, before it becomes even more a part of each person's life, we ought to stop and think.
The concern over the erosion of privacy in America by means of a new technology reaches from the aware and informed private citizen to the Supreme Court and one of its great justices, William O. Douglas, who spoke to us in his office in Washington.
I'm afraid now that we have some 20 minor data centers, that the tendency of Americans to do what they can do well will be to put them all together and have one big one. I've been reading the hearings that Senator Long of Missouri has been holding in the Senate, and Senator Gallagher, Congressman Gallagher has been holding in the House, and doing a lot of thinking about this, and it really has terrifying aspects. Because a personnel file includes all sorts of things. When I was a professor, when I was a practicing lawyer, when I was a head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, even now once in a while, as I'm a judge, I get inquiries from employers, prospective employers, federal, state, private, as respects some person that I knew. Is this person trustworthy? Is this person nervous? Is this person reliable? Is this person honorable? Does this person have extreme views? And all sorts of things. And my appraisal of an individual, like anybody who was interviewed concerning Mr. X or Mr. Y, is highly subjective. Maybe we've known him for a long time. Maybe we've known him or her just for a short time. Maybe it was a student. Maybe the person whom we knew was going through some terrible cycle and was a disturbed person. Maybe that person is no longer disturbed. Maybe the condition that we identify of that person has been utterly removed. But the great danger is that these subjective things, once they reach a machine, will become a fact. And so all you have to do is press a button and find out all the nervous people in the United States. Press a button and find out all the unreliable people in the United States. Press a button and find out all the subversive people in the United States. Everybody will be categorized by somebody's subjective appraisal. We're supposed to live under a regime, a society, where there's a whole room, a wide spectrum for idiosyncrasies. for the development of individual tastes in politics, music, economic theory, and everything. With the tendency in this country for conformity, regimentation, those who are connected with the establishment, with the status quo, will tend to make their appraisals of people in those kind of terms. And the computer will take those, and the computer will translate what is highly subjective into a fact. And that fact will take the case of of an arrest. Have you ever been arrested? Has this man ever been arrested? Well, in the District of Columbia, we've had as high as 7,000 arrests a year for investigation. There's no such crime. Those are unconstitutional arrests. In Russia you can arrest a man for investigation, but you're not supposed to arrest anybody in the United States unless you see him or her committing a crime, or unless you have evidence that you submit to a magistrate showing probable cause that this person has committed a crime. Then the magistrate issues an arrest warrant. All right, you have all these unconstitutional arrests. Some parts of our country, you have a civil rights protester who's exercising a constitutional right to assemble, guaranteed by the First Amendment, to petition the government, guaranteed by the First Amendment, to make a speech, guaranteed by the First Amendment, to hand out a pamphlet, guaranteed by the First Amendment, arrested by the police. Why? Well, he's unpopular. He belongs to the wrong race. He's espousing the wrong set of ideas. They charge him with what? Vagrancy. They charge him with what? Disorderly conduct, trespass, breach of the peace, conventional instrumentalities for suppressing the unpopular. The problem of erasing an arrest that has later been held to be unconstitutional is a considerable problem. I don't know of any surefire way of doing it. There's been no routine method to date worked out. So everything goes into the computer and this so-called criminal record may come back to a man when he's 50 years old and about to be promoted to the head of a big federal agency. And here's this criminal record against him, a wholly unconstitutional thing. These are some of the very dangerous potentialities of the data center.
Is what's good for industry good for the country? It wasn't meant to be good for Ralph Nader. It may be good business for the credit companies to talk to your neighbors about your personal life, but such prying could cause you personal embarrassment and damage. These activities already pose a serious threat to the survival of individual privacy. But now, if the National Data Center comes into being, it must be given sufficient safeguards to assure that it will not result in the end of privacy as we know it. If the struggle to preserve privacy is important enough, now is the time to decide whether what's good for industry, the credit companies, and even the efficiency of government is to take precedence. To decide if this baby is to grow up to an Orwellian nightmare or a world in which 1984 is just another year. Narrator Philip Sterling.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.